Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly incredible, a fictional account pieced together from detailed source reports of the U.S. abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro in January 2026. We're going to break down how it happened, why, and the huge shockwaves it sent around the world.
So our story really kicks off with this striking quote from then-President Trump. Right away, this frames the whole thing not just as some political maneuver, but as this massive display of military power. In fact, reports described it as the riskiest U.S. operation since the raid that killed Osama bin Laden back in 2011.
And here it is, the unbelievable outcome. Just hours after being snatched from his compound in Caracas, there he was, Nicolás Maduro, standing in a U.S. federal courthouse. I mean, think about that. It's a moment that just completely shatters all the normal rules of geopolitics.
Right, so the big question is, how on earth did this happen? To get to the bottom of that, we've got to rewind and look at how the source materials say this absolutely incredible operation unfolded.
Okay, so let's start with where this all ended up. The reports state that on that day in January, President Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were officially in U.S. custody. They were in a Manhattan federal court about to face drug charges.
So how did they pull it off? Well, the sources give us this really detailed look at a meticulously planned mission, and it had a code name that sounds like it's straight out of a Hollywood movie. Absolute Resolve.
Yeah, this was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. Not at all. Reports from Al Jazeera and the BBC, citing U.S. officials, make it clear that this operation was the result of months of intelligence gathering. They even rehearsed the raid on a full-scale replica of Maduro's compound, and the New York Times reported a huge break. The CIA had an inside source who gave them Maduro's exact location.
And look at this timeline. It really shows you the incredible speed and, frankly, the precision of this whole thing. From President Trump giving the go order to Maduro being on a U.S. warship, it was just a few hours. And the raid itself, the actual on-the-ground part, reportedly over and done in less than 30 minutes.
And if you're trying to get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number. According to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we're talking about a fleet of 150 aircraft. They launched from 20 different bases across the entire Western Hemisphere. All of that power, just to carry out this one abduction.
Okay, so we've seen the how. Now for the why. This was such a huge, almost unprecedented move. So what was the justification from the Trump administration? What was their reasoning?
Well, in interviews and press conferences, President Trump's line was that the U.S. was going to nurse the country back to health. He said no to immediate elections, and here's the part that really surprised people. He also said no to backing the well-known opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, saying she didn't have enough respect within the country.
And this right here is a really key piece of the puzzle. An NBC News source mentioned a classified intelligence assessment, and what it basically said was, forget the opposition. The plan was to support a transfer of power inside the existing regime to then Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. She was seen as the best way to keep the country stable.
Of course, all this high-level political chess wasn't happening in a vacuum. On the ground in Venezuela, things got very real and very violent very fast. The human cost was steep. The Cuban government reported that 32 of its military and intelligence personnel who were part of Maduro's security were killed after putting up what they called fierce resistance. On top of that, a New York Times source said at least 40 Venezuelans died.
And for the regular people, the civilians just caught in the middle of all this, it was just a night of absolute terror. The AFP news agency spoke with Linda Unamumo, a public worker whose roof was actually destroyed. Her words just paint such a vivid picture of the fear people were feeling.
And you get other accounts, like from this shopkeeper, Alexander Ortega, who talked to Al Jazeera. He was asleep and suddenly gets jolted awake by these massive explosions. He thought they were fireworks at first, but then he realized it was military strikes. Just crazy.
So what happened next in the power vacuum is really crucial. With Maduro gone, how does the power transfer work? Well, according to the reports, Venezuela's own Supreme Court stepped in. They cited the president's forced absence and appointed Vice President Delcy Rodriguez to the top job, a move the U.S. had apparently anticipated and was ready to support.
Now, as you can probably imagine, an operation like this, it didn't exactly go unnoticed on the world stage. It set off this massive, immediate international firestorm, and it drew some really clear lines in the sand.
And the condemnation was, well, It was almost universal. You had everyone from the UN Security Council, and that includes US allies, speaking out against it. Then you had these protests erupting all over the world. NBC News reported people burning US flags in places from Buenos Aires to Manila. And world leaders, from China to Colombia to European nations, they all had some pretty harsh words. And this really boils it all down, right? You have these two completely opposite ways of looking at the exact same event. On one side, the US is framing it as this necessary action to enforce the law and fix a country. But on the other, you have the UN Human Rights Office saying, whoa, this is a dangerous violation of international law and a country's right to govern itself.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that courtroom in New York. According to the reports, Maduro pleads not guilty to all the charges. And then he says something that completely reframes the whole situation from his perspective. He looks at the judge and declares, "I am a prisoner of war," basically rejecting the entire legitimacy of the trial.
And that's where the reports leave us. You have a foreign power that has forcibly removed one leader and effectively endorsed another. As the entire world watches to see what happens next, we're left with this huge unresolved question. What does this mean for the future of Venezuela? And really, what kind of precedent does this set for the idea of national sovereignty itself?